This is Lecker. I'm Lucy Dearlove. I don't know if it's an after effect of the publishing industry dealing with 2 years of lockdowns or some other reason, but there's been an avalanche of incredible books published recently, and particularly books of personal and memoir writing related to food. But what does it mean to write a food memoir or to be an author of personal food writing in 2022? This month, I've got 3 episodes lined up for you. Interviews with the writers of some of my favourite food writing of recent times, beginning with this one.
It's just such an exposing thing, I think, with memoir writing.
I was in denial about memoir until I started writing, and then I realised that memoir was a really big aspect of it and drawing on life.
Part of yourself is out there and other people know so much about you.
To do that, you have to be able to write about yourself in some way, and that is really hard.
When my brother read it, he was just saying oh, this is just a fraction. This is the PG-friendly version.
I wanted to give that attention, that intellectual attention that I've been given so long to literature, to cooking. You have to be your own type of freaky clown.
You do.
On this episode, Angela Hoy and Rebecca May Johnson. Angela Hoy and Rebecca May Johnson are responsible for 2 of my favourite books of the year. Angela's book Takeaway is a memoir based on her experiences growing up in her family's Chinese takeaway in the Welsh Valleys. And Rebecca's book Small Fires is an electrifying, innovative memoir where she rewrites the kitchen as a vital source of knowledge and revelation. I was with Angela and Rebecca a few months ago, and they started talking to each other about the writing of their books, and I rudely interrupted them to ask if they'd be up for postponing the conversation so I could record it for Lecker. They very generously agreed, and so a few weeks ago, Angela and I got the train to Harwich, to where Rebecca lives, and recorded it. Just to mention before we start, if you haven't read one or both of the books and you're planning to, there is some discussion of key events and kind of sections in the books. So if you prefer to be spoiler-free, then I recommend you read before listening to this. And also a content note, there is some mention in passing of domestic abuse and gambling addiction, as well as racism, as these are themes present in Angela's book. I started by asking both Angela and Rebecca if they had read any personal or memoir writing centred around food while writing their books or beforehand, and what impact it had left on them.
I don't know, I'm trying to think. At the end of my book, I wrote a reading list, which I felt really helped. That's the kind of just the research that I did throughout, and I felt like it was just more as a way of respecting others. This is what I read, and it was almost acknowledging those that came before me that also helped. I'm gonna have a little look who I wrote now, but it was just when I wrote this, it was during lockdown, so I was reading a lot more on anti-Asian hate crime and just reading up on East and Southeast Asian authors, and I read a lot of Cathy Park Hong. It was part memoir, part poetry, but a lot of the stuff resonated.
I mean, I make a lot of citations in the book. At the end, I have works referenced in order of their appearance, but most of them are not food books. But I guess, I don't know. Let me think about this.
I'm trying to think,
thinking of memoirs.
Yeah.
Your answers to that was
non-food, yeah.
I mean, I've enjoyed stuff in the past, Elizabeth David's essays and stuff, but actually I don't even cite her in this book at all. But a memoir that I read in the year before writing the book was Audre Lorde's book Zami, which isn't specifically a food memoir. It's about growing up in Harlem in the 30s and the 40s as a black child in a very racially segregated environment. And that obviously doesn't relate to my personal biography at all, but there's an amazing use of food in the book as a way of telling you about her life, about the political situation at the time, her relationship with her mother, pleasure, so much about pleasure and sex in that book that's to do with food, and the kind of ways that food breaks down boundaries between different categories of life in Audre Lorde's book, I thought was very interesting and inspiring and helpful.
Yeah, I think you write about a picnic, right? That she goes on with her family.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so many good food points in the book, but this one really kind of crystallizes so much of what their family was going through at the time, which, like, they were going on a family trip to Washington that she was really, really excited about. Her mum knew that they were going to be discriminated against, that they were not going to be able to go into some of the nice places because of racial segregation. So she made this incredibly elaborate and beautiful picnic that kind of was like a way of attending to and respecting and loving every single part of her family's body and their life. And it's just so moving. And when they got there, they couldn't go to the ice cream parlor, and they got made to leave by the white waitress. And but they didn't miss out on any pleasure in that day. Well, her mum did everything that she could to make that they didn't by making this beautiful picnic. Yeah. So yeah, that's not like, I'm white, obviously, and I didn't grow up in that situation, but the way in which Lorde weaves through food through her memoir, I found very interesting and inspiring. For me as well, actually, I don't think I cite it in the book, but there's this social theorist called Luce Giard, who was part of a big project called The Practice of Everyday Life from, I think, the late 70s in France, led by this sociologist called Michel de Certeau. I first encountered that work through meeting my partner, who's a social scientist. And I kind of was rifling through the book, and it had this whole section on cooking and doing. So there's long passages, and it's like a real huge social study of France in the late 70s and early 80s, I think. And big studies of like food shopping practices and looking at things like that as a way of understanding society on a broader basis, and from the microcosm of that. But there's one very poetic passage that Giard wrote about how culinary knowledge is passed through generations, specifically of women. And it's something incredibly romantic about it, sort of the gesture of your hand, and I will honour your life through this gesture, through reenacting these gestures. However, I won't inherit the servitudes that you suffered. I don't want to inherit the servitudes that you suffered, but I do want to inherit these beautiful gestures of cooking with your hands, this knowledge that's held in the body. And reading that theory was so exciting and made me think about the richness of the knowledge that's carried in the body and how that's part of biography. So that's not, I guess, food memoir in a traditional sense, but it helped me understand what I could do with writing about food, or like how I could try and take it seriously.
I didn't realise when writing the book there was just so much research. I think I read more than like actually researching other people's. Like, I think I read like similar food memoirs. I think it was like Olivia Potts's like what was her book? It was the when she
A Half-Baked Idea.
Yes, that was it. Half-Baked Idea, and like Felicity Cloak's like One More Croissant for the Road, like similar formats where they had recipes for, and Dolly Alderton book as well, which had like recipes and then it breaks it up in between. But again, it was like slightly different, I would say. It's not exactly like food, well, other than Olivia's one, but it was interesting. Like you said, it's similar to you, how reading other work that wasn't exactly food that influenced you. I also read Ocean Vuong's On Earth, We Are Briefly Gorgeous, which is about him like finding his, sexuality and living in, I don't know where he lived. It was like in the middle of nowhere, essentially, like similar upbringing, like almost like the Midwest, where it's like there's not much going on and you feel the same kind of resonate, like you resonate with the same thing.
Yeah, in a way, I think sometimes the category food writing is like a false category in a sense, because it's writing and it's in dialogue with so many other forms of literature and writing, and I don't know, somehow just food writing is almost inadequate as a category.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also somehow depoliticizes sometimes. Well, I write a bit about this in my book as well, but like Angela's book is so political, in what it does and its impact. And, you know, it's funny and lively and all those things as well, and compelling, etc. But it's also a profoundly political book about, you know, migration and racism and, you know, so much stuff and language and understanding. And yeah, I kind of feel I feel like everyone should read it.
I feel the same with your book. It's like, even though our books are food books, but I feel like food is also like an afterthought. It's like there's so many other aspects of it. With yours, it was also trying to find, like, as a coming of age as well. Both our books are coming of age, but our different periods of time. I feel like you, with yours, like I said a bit before about you in Berlin, just trying to find yourself, changing your exterior to try and fit in, and, you know, different surroundings. And
you talk about outfits as well.
Yeah, like I feel like that's where I really resonated with your book. It was very much changing who you are to try and fit in. Trying to fit into like to society and not really ever being happy with yourself and finding yourself, and then just food just so happens to be part of it as well, I think.
And actually in different ways as well, we both write a lot about labour, you know, different types of work, and thinking about that work and the role of that work and how that work is valued or not valued, or seen or not seen and stuff, which, you know, again, like that's also, I think, part of the political aspect of significantly huge intervention that your book makes into how British society understands itself, is bearing witness to that labour and what it really means and what it really takes. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a rural place, and sadly, we didn't have access to a Chinese takeaway because it's nothing close enough. But you know, like, as you say, there's the counter, and then there's everything that goes on behind it, and it's a story that is just not told enough. And it's just like, it's a real space of heroic acts of labour on behalf of your parents and you, and like, it's just incredible. It's like a really dramatic space as well, like so much of life and so much knowledge and so much, you know, it's just incredible. Yeah.
I mean, it's the same with you. It was like when you write about how you worked in a fish and chip shop. I mean, probably the most perfect passage about how you had saveloys and comparing that to like eating it was like the odds and ends basically, and how it was just like the entrails of everything. But like, it just shows it's a similar sense where working in these type of environments and spaces that aren't given as much day of light, and the stories that aren't really told through that. And I loved the, you know, just working in like the everyday situations that people often oversee.
Because I'm writing about cooking in my 20s as a student, I mean, because I did a PhD, I was a student for a really long time, but just moving house a lot, I guess, thinking about just domestic labour as well. And like, I think a lot of people struggle to value the work that they do in domestic space and think about it as interesting and funny and knowledgeable. And even my mum's a great cook, and that's a real space in which she speaks in a way through her cooking. But she always plays it down, you know, always. And she won't even claim her own knowledge sometimes. And she shies away from that. And, I just did this. It wasn't really that, you know. And there's always this minimizing of that work. And I just really wanted to expand, you know, give pages and pages to those everyday acts of thinking and working in the kitchen.
I think that's one of the kind of parallels between both your books that occurred to me, is that the crossing of that boundary between the domestic and the outside world. So I think in your book, Rebecca, I really loved how cooking was written about alongside fashion, alongside art, alongside clubbing, alongside sex. Like, I think it doesn't often get considered in that position. And I think, and even like for you, Angela, the like physical boundary of the counter, like a lot of people just would never consider what goes on behind that. Like, that's a very like, it's a really like nice metaphorical and like actual boundary, that it like the domestic is also like, there was no line for you. Like, it was very blurred between like domestic and business and food. So I think it's interesting. One of the first questions I had to ask you both was what were the similarities you thought between your books, but like it's come up naturally because there are so many parallels.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like on the surface of it, they might seem like quite different books, but there's actually a lot in common. So did you both know when you were writing that it was a coming of age book?
Well, I feel like it's natural because it's been all my life. So it is just writing my life, and it was throughout all my childhood. You know, I was born in Wales, and I started working when I was 8. And when I was a baby, my mum would just put me in a chip box under the pantry in like this, under the stairs. There's like a little pantry where we had like metal stacks of, you know, like there was like eggs and flour and sugar, everything we need, and there was like a little like shutter. So I don't know how I slept because it's like right next to the extractor fan. So my mum would just check in on me every now and then. So yeah, as a baby, I was like in a trip box and I would run around. And so I feel like it was just a natural, I had to be kind of a coming of age because there was so much, well, it was so much, it was such my life essentially up until, when was it? Up until like I was 26. Pretty much. So it was like such a big portion of it. And yeah, I feel like it just came to me naturally, I think. Yeah.
I was very resistant to that for ages. Even the word memoir was something I really resisted a lot.
Why?
And my publisher tried really hard to get it in the title, and I didn't let them. Because, you know, for commercial reasons, like I think that, you know, epic is like, what is an epic? Because I guess, I don't know. Probably because I spent too long at university, but no, not really. Anyway, but I guess I thought of it as like an intellectual pursuit at first. You know, it took me ages to think about what the book was going to be. It's very, I guess, it's quite a strange book in some ways. Like it's not chronological. What is the logic behind the chapter progression? It just sort of emerged, but it's not. But the progression is maybe more to do with gestures or feelings or thought, like the movement of different thoughts, rather than rather than my life. So the book is not bound to my biography chronologically at all. Yeah. When I was thinking about the book, I was like, you know, I want to give this intellect, because, you know, I wanted to draw on my PhD studies, and I wanted to give that attention, that intellectual attention that I've been given so long to literature, to cooking. And I think I thought, oh, you know, my life, why is my life relevant or interesting to this in a way? Even though all of the knowledge that I had and that I wanted to write about really came out of cooking myself. But I didn't want me to be the focus. And in a way, although there is memoir in the book, it's not about me in a really intense way. Like as a person, I feel like I use myself as a way to explore ideas, but I'm going to sound like a knob now. I use the I, as in the pronoun I, as a space of exploring these ideas and asking these questions, rather than being confessional. My book is not confessional, really. And actually, I do think I remain at a distance in the book, ultimately.
I felt that too. Like, I felt like when I was reading about you and your life, but it just didn't feel like, oh, this is all about me and my story and my life. But it also felt like it was everyone's I, if that made sense.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, I wanted, and other people who aren't me are also not named. So everyone who's not me, everyone who's not I is you. That was very purposeful because I wanted there not to be a hierarchy of relationships in the book. Because one of the things I wanted to express about cooking and food, something that I found out through living, so I guess that's the memoir aspect of it, is that there is an erotics and an intimacy, and an erotic and an intimate dimension to food and cooking for all people, whoever they are, those sort of frissons, those moments, wanting to sate the desire of someone. You know, that's very intimate. Wanting to make someone feel pleasure, that's very intimate. Yeah. And I think significantly, we often try to exclude the sort of the erotic and the intimate from how we talk about food, and because it's almost too much, it's almost feels inappropriate. But of course, we're taking something from outside ourselves and putting it in our body. Now, what other context does that take place? I mean, it depends on your preferences, obviously, but often in a sexual context. And so it's not to make it sort of weird or pervy or whatever, although I think there are some slightly horny moments in the book.
That's fine.
but it's more like I wanted to sort of desanitize that aspect of what food is about in one's life.
Yeah.
Which it is part of lots of moments of physical, personal difficulty or, desire and discovery and all those things. And so in that sense, I draw on memoir, I draw on lived experience to ask these questions. So I guess I'm like taking the methods that I was trained in from doing a PhD, and then I'm taking it into the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I guess because I thought that at the beginning, I struggled to think of it as memoir. But now I've come to I've made my peace with the idea of memoir, and I see it as a really important tool for thinking.
Mm.
And Angela's book has so many moments of theorising and thinking in it, drawing on everyday life as well.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And did you find it, I mean, I think what struck me about I think especially your book, Angela, is like writing from the point of view of your younger self. How did it feel to kind of revisit that self?
I think like a few people have asked. I was like, a lot of people say book writing is very therapeutic, which it is in a sense, but it was really traumatic, I thought, because it's such a personal thing. And there's things I never really talked about with anyone else, like domestic abuse or my dad's gambling and, having a very dysfunctional family and all these self-identity worries and just worrying about like what others would perceive of me, and it just really sent me into like anxiety, like madness. And then afterwards I had to get therapy after book writing. I think I was really worried about what other people would say. Like I know a lot of my family members, especially in Asian culture, it's very like in Asian culture, it's much everyone keeps to themselves. They don't talk about certain things. It's very taboo, and especially topics like these, a lot of people would shy away from. And even my aunties who've like said about the book afterwards, they're like, "Oh, why have you written this book?" Like, and I think when I told my parents when I wrote, I'm writing a book, the first thing they said, like, "Why are you writing a book on us? Like, we're not interesting in any way." But
I mean, that's their feeling. What you've just expressed there is the fact that you've gone and done it is also one part of what's so significant about it.
Yeah, I think what really shocked me is just so many people that resonated with it. And then obviously like this is very much my life, but it also resonates with so many of the takeaway kids, but not just takeaway kids, but people who grew up in pubs or people who worked in fish and chips or grew up in fish and chips or never really had a childhood that was kind of robbed of them. They all kind of resonate. And it's just really, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the words.
It's always very brave.
I mean, I would say, I don't know, at the time of writing, I didn't feel like I was very brave. I just felt like I was almost like writing a diary that I never really kept before. When working, I think someone asked me before, asking like, did you ever keep a diary when you're working the take? When I never did, because
when's the time?
I didn't have time.
You were trying to do your homework.
Yeah, I was doing my homework, and it was almost like throughout childhood, you kind of living through trauma, and you just have to deal with it, and this is it, and you'd never really acknowledge it. And until a couple of years later, when we sold the shop in 2018. You kind of reevaluate and you really miss the time, like you get really nostalgic of the shop, and having the shop was almost like the sixth family member, because you put the shop before your own needs. You'd always prep work, you wake up, go to wholesalers and buy ingredients, and you'd always be back before work be back home at 5 p.m. for work. And then when we sold the shop, it was just trying to reconfigure like who we are in our lives and try to figure out our own paths. And I felt like that's what really kind of made me want to write the book in the first place. It was trying to, first of all, obviously like document this really unique but strange experience in life, growing up in a Chinese takeaway. But also, just trying to put it to pen to thought, I think.
Understand it.
Yeah, understand it. because I feel like a lot of people who grew up in that environment never really had the chance to, they're like, oh yeah, that actually did happen to us. Like you don't realize when you're actually living it and working within it, I think. Yeah.
By making that narrative, you've given people the space, you've made a space in which people can have those conversations with themselves and think and reflect. And then from the other side, like, I'm white, we're similar in age. I remember as well the casual, horrible racism of that period. And it's such an important thing and brave thing. And, it's so that you've documented. It's awful that you ever had to do it or experience it from the other side. And, every fucking white person in the UK should read that, because it was just everywhere, and still, things like Little Britain, I guess that kind of horrible strain of humor kind of goes on in some kind of places.
So normalized.
It was so normalized. Like, there was so much. I mean, that period of time was so fucking weird politically. Like, I mean, on a different note, like, I wrote very briefly about in my book what not to wear.
Yeah.
And I went back on YouTube and watched some old episodes, and the absolute violence of the language that they used to the people's bodies that they had on the show. Yeah. Like the heinous fat phobia and hatred.
And we just internalized it.
And that was the norm. Yeah. And it was such a popular TV show. I remember being like with my, talking about it with my school friends, and it's like, oh, I'm like this, therefore I can't wear that or do that or whatever.
It was only reading that in your book that I was like, oh my God.
You should go and watch some old episodes on YouTube. It's like, what the hell? And also for people, I imagine for people who also experienced it, like having it laid out there like that, it must, I don't know, it must be really helpful.
Yeah, I think it was very therapeutic in the sense where you address a lot of the racism that's not really talked about. But again, it just, I internalized a lot of it, where you just feel like, oh, this is just part and parcel of the job. Like, you just have to deal with it. And my brother posted about the book because he'd finally read it, even though he'd read like some first drafts, but not like from start to finish. And he made a post about it, and it made me cry so much. And I was like on the tube reading it. And obviously it's told from my perspective. And even though they were like my early colleagues, so they worked in the kitchen as well as front of house as well. And they obviously deal with the racism as well. But he said that, I never realized that you were very sexualized as well at a young age, because you're on the front lines and the counter, you're dealing with all these like drunk customers, and you're asking these like old 60-year-old, 70-year-old men asking you to marry you with like a 12-year-old girl, and it's quite fucked up. Sorry, am I allowed to swear?
You are.
It's great. I'm going to swear some more. And yeah, it's just really messed up time that you never really think to re-examine. Then when you look back on it and you're writing it and you're faced with it again, you're like, oh my God, like, did I really do, like, I can't believe I just brushed it off. I can't believe I didn't say anything then. I think I was such a shy, awkward kid, and I think it didn't help either being one of the very few Asian families in.
Well, it's implicitly dangerous.
Yeah,
like it's well, and explicitly, as you write about in the book, to stick up for yourself was something that could cause danger to you, physical and other types of danger. Like, it was very threatening. It's a very threatening situation. As a 12-year-old, you shouldn't have to be addressing the racism and sexualization of an older person. Like, it's a totally unequal distribution of power. Like, there's no way you could have done. There's nothing.
That's so interesting, though, that like, even though obviously you had very similar experiences to your brothers, there's obviously just like parts of each other's stories that you never like witnessed or talked about. Yeah, it must have been like quite traumatic to relive those.
Yeah, but in a way, I was debating for ages whether it includes certain details, like a lot of the racism and some of our very, very personal family problems. And I spoke to my partner and some family members as well, saying like, I don't know whether to include these things. Like, I never even talked to my parents about certain things because, again, in Asian culture, we just don't talk about feelings. We don't talk about how we're feeling. We don't talk about mental health. Like, those things don't really exist. And I was debating whether to write it. And my partner said, like, if you're not writing these things, I don't think you're kind of writing your like authentic self in a way. You're kind of sugarcoating the actual experience
So
of it.
you couldn't say it, so you have to write it.
Yeah, I felt like that's how it was really. You had to just write. It was almost like word vomiting on a page, and this is what the result is. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like some people even asked, they were like, is this actually a true story or is it dramatized? I'm like, no, these things actually
Probably
happened.
even more dramatic if you told them everything.
Yeah, and like this is, and I told when my mum like saw, you know, well, my parents haven't read it because they can't speak English or read English. But when my brother read it, he was just saying like, oh, this is just like a fraction. This is like the PG friendly version. Like the stuff outside of the book is like even worse. I feel like I've just kind of filtered out a lot of the worse, like the even worse stuff, for like it's a bit more palatable for people, I feel. But yeah, yeah. But how was it for you, Rebecca, for your book writing? I want to know, because you said you went to therapy afterwards too.
No, before.
Was it before?
Yeah, I was struggling to start the book, and I got a grant from the Society of Authors to help, as a work in progress grant to help support the writing, and I used that to start therapy, which is great because then the week I started therapy, I was able to start writing, having not been able to. But I think it released something. And what I said about being in denial about memoir, like I was in denial about memoir until I started writing, and then I realised that like memoir was a really big aspect of it and drawing on life. But to do that, you have to be able to write about yourself in some way, and that is really hard. And to contemplate yourself at different points in time and what you were feeling or the difficulties you were going through. And so whilst it's not confessional, I suppose, I'm still writing about things I'm doing at different times. Sometimes I teach creative writing, and I said to students recently, you can't just write a book that your parents would approve of, because then what would be in it? Like nothing. It would be like a weird sanitized fairy tale. Do you know what I mean? Because that's, obviously parents want everything to be okay for their kids, and they don't want, anyway, whatever. So, even just writing about things like sex, sexuality, horniness, my gender, like I write quite a lot about my feelings about my own gender quite early in the book. There's a real
very early
in the book, straight in there. And I write, in quite an erotic way, writing about apron wearing, but also bringing in sort of some gender theory that I read early in my 20s that made a big impact on me, and feelings about that kind of stuff. So that's writing about gender and sexuality, things like that in my life, and other points when I've been depressed or had fatigue. Towards the end of the book, I write about having fatigue and sort of not being able to get up or do anything, and I didn't want to. And someone was saying they were surprised at how much, like at the end of the book, and that one of the sort of the final big chapter, I write a lot about not cooking and being on the sofa and feeling crap and like hating what I'm cooking and just sort of not being interested in it. And I wanted to keep the difficulty in the text. I didn't want to have a falsely sanitized impression of happy cooking, the happy cook all the time, because that isn't the case. And I wanted to present the complexity of cooking in such as I had encountered it. And that includes being totally unable to cook when I have fatigue. When I have fatigue, which I get periodically, I can't do anything. Just have to, I lose cognitive function. I just have to lie down or watch TV or something. I can't really walk around, anything like that. Yeah, I wanted to include that stuff as well. And that was, I guess that was a real decision. I don't know, not to pretend that things are different to what they were.
No, but I think it's just such an exposing thing. I think with memoir writing, it's such a, that's the still thing I'm still trying to wrap my head around. It's the exposing thing, because it's such a raw thing. Part of yourself is out there, and other people know so much about you. That's the thing that really terrifies me. And
it's like looking in the mirror and seeing all the difficult things about yourself, and not keeping the shitty things about yourself off the page. And it's hard because usually if you're given an account of yourself to someone in casual conversation, or you meet for the first time, or on your CV, or in a job application, or whenever in other occasions you make a sort of image of yourself, you exclude all that crap usually.
Yeah, you self-edit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the nicest things that someone said who read an early copy of the book was that it made them feel okay about not cooking. And it gave them space to not want to cook, because people don't have to cook if they don't want to.
Absolutely.
I didn't want to write some evangelizing text about cooking. Like, I wanted to document its richness, but I also wanted to document that it is work and that it's difficult and you can't always do it, and you might also feel shit about doing it and hate your own meals sometimes and everything like that, because you don't have to pretend it's great all the time.
Yeah, like I love that as well. With like, that's another like similarities in our book. I felt was just food isn't always like, oh, this bringing together happiness, bundle of joy. It was also like food was also very painful and thing that you kind of reject, you don't even want at times. And I remember there was like one argument I had with my dad, and he was trying to make it up for me through one of my favorite foods, steamed egg. And I was just like, how do I accept this food when we just had this massive argument and I don't even really want it? It's like, it's almost
such a difficult moment in the book.
And it's almost the same as you. It's just like, I don't even have the energy or the same, like when you're so fatigued and food is the last thing on your mind.
Yeah, and you, when you're physically unable to do it, the amount of work and thinking that actually it requires is so evident because you can't do it.
Yeah.
And it's suddenly, and then you realise as well how much people who do it all the time, like, my mum, for example, growing up, like how much minimising there is of the work that is involved.
Yeah.
And that's also the thing about the takeaway, isn't it? Like, it's totally. For the consumer, it's something of convenience. Even like a minor delay in your delivery makes people angry, as you kind of account for in the book. But on the other side, there's huge amounts of labour and shopping and child labour and everything, and it's not, there's nothing convenient about it for those who are making it. It's huge.
I think one of the things that struck me about both of your books that felt quite different from, I think, a lot of food writing is like the focus on routine and repetition and like doing the same things over and over again, cooking the same things over and over again, like whether by choice or necessity. I feel like a lot of food writing focuses on like the new or the novel. Was that like, I mean, obviously it was just a part and parcel of like the thing that you were writing about, but was that something you were conscious about?
I think I was too. Because, working in the takeaway, it was very much, like you said, it was like a production line because you're dealing with work. We had massive vats of egg fried rice that we had to like get through every day, and it was just cooking the same thing again and again. So you kind of lose the joy out of it because you become disassociated with food, because you kind of see it as like, as a way of making money. You lose the joy of it. And I think that's why I kind of really fell out of love with food for such a long time. And I wanted to come, when I moved to London to find my own way and have my own job, I wanted to work in fashion because I was like the complete opposite end of food. And I wanted to have a very very my own way, and then realised I hate fashion. And it took me a really long time to kind of fall back in love with food again and to actually be okay with it. I think there is like good and bad in like repetition and like cooking the same things again and again. There's a lot of comfort in that as well, how, we always had fun, like regardless of working in the shop and all the other things that we had to do, prepping and making sure we went to like Chinese school and regular school as well, and helping out and deliveries. Like my parents always made sure that we always had a great family meal, which was such a big thing, and that was such a central pillar. And it didn't really matter that we always ate the same thing.
And it was for you, though. It wasn't for the customers.
Yeah, and it was just for us. It was a very sacred thing. And sometimes I took those for granted, thinking like, oh, I really don't want family meal. I don't want rice. I even specifically said to my mum, I was like, I want burger and chips or, beans on toast like all my other white friends.
An escape from the routine. It seems like what Lucy was saying about repetition, and you were just saying like you had no escape from it. You know, you had to come back to it on your own terms when you're older, when you'd had the opportunity to refuse it and to turn away from it for a period of time so you could come back to it on your own terms, and it wasn't something you had no choice about.
I feel as I've grown up, it's like almost like a fresh pair of eyes. You're re-examining or like falling back in love with it
and you have
again.
the freedom to choose it now.
Yeah, exactly, rather than being forced on me. But yeah,
because obviously you have the residual expertise of that period when it was forced on you, but you're not having to do that work all the time.
Yeah, and I feel like I do like look back on those like family meals with such fondness.
Yeah.
And I really miss them. Like my mum and my dad made so much effort into just making this, you know, very elaborate. They would always make it over the top.
Really?
You know, there was only 5 of us, but they'd probably feed 10 of us. You know,
That's
they'd always
so
go
nice.
above and beyond. And as a child, I just was such a brat, and I never really appreciated that and everything that they did for us.
Well,
and I think that's what I wanted to include in the book, was just like, it's almost like fantasizing about that again as an adult when I reread it and written it again, those family meals.
maybe you're experiencing what your parents are trying to do.
Yeah. Just trying to make sure that we had enough food to eat, for one, because my parents came from such like troubled childhoods. You know, my mum growing up in the Cultural Revolution, and my dad had a very scrappy childhood in Hong Kong, like dropping out of school since he was 13. So they always had, you know, they both had never enough to eat. So it was always a priority to make sure that we were fed. I mean,
but you don't have to feel guilty about as a child, because you're only a child.
Yeah.
And it was also challenging from what you write about in your book.
Yeah, I feel like I do feel a lot of other takeaway kids that I have spoken to also feel that same guilt, where they all felt like a brat. They all felt like they were very, they all just felt they were very ungrateful. They were just very harsh to their parents. They were just lashing out on their parents because of this environment that we're in. And, you know, having to have the obligation, like you have to work, but you also want to be obliged to help your family because this is your family.
It's an impossible situation, though, and it's a structure, it's a systemic. You know, the fact of it being so hard to survive financially and migrating, and you know that it's from what you write about in your book, like those demands made it really hard for everyone, and to have feelings and have a family and show your care for people in that context is really hard.
Yeah.
What about routine and repetition for you, Rebecca? Like at the heart of the book, there's a cooking, you know, this idea of cooking the same recipe over and over again. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting. I've also been thinking recently about that comment you made about the focus on novelty, and I think that's a capitalist thing.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, Marx writes about it in Capital.
Oh, really?
that it always needs innovation as a way of generating more capital. On the whole, technological innovations are a way of making, either generating new sources of profit or making things more efficient, so you can have greater.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway,
yeah.
Sorry, we don't need to go through that. But
no, it's definitely important.
Because actually, most people's daily cooking in the home is relatively repetitive.
Yeah,
and that is both very kind of grounding in a sense that it is something that you return to, that you help, and through which you understand yourself over time. Through each time you return to a dish over a long period of time, it becomes a way of engaging your mood, or where, you know, so many different things, because you cook the same dish different ways depending on what's going on. And I became interested in the idea of this recipe that I'd made. I mean, I say 1,000 times, who knows,
metaphorically 1,000 times,
but definitely hundreds and hundreds. And it became this one recipe that I cooked over and over again, became a kind of founding sort of grammar almost for all of my cooking. It gave me a new understanding of cooking, and which then became the basis of all cooking I did after that point. So then I guess it was the basis of a language in that sense. And if you think about, you know, all that happens in the hundreds of times that Angela's, you know, mum makes the same dish, the thoughts she has, the encounters, the life that she sustains, like everything that goes on, like, And again, Angela has like blown up the takeaway to an epic narrative of migration and coming of age and identity and parental love and difficulty and racism and, you know, modern life, you know. And so in that repetition is so much of life, and forms of labor that originate in the domestic, like cooking, like cleaning, like so many of those things, through, you know, misogyny and neocolonialism and racism and so many things, they get made to seem like less in our culture, but they're everything and they're so important.
For you, with the like book writing process, like how did you feel about it the entire time? I guess that just in terms of, obviously a lot of people ask like, oh, is it therapeutic for you? But I guess like, how did you even
it's really hard to start.
It's
like, very intense. I put myself under a lot of pressure, as I think you did. I struggled to start. I found it very intense. I had to take rests in between chapters. In fact, I actually got ill in between some chapters with fatigue and had to sort of like literally like lie down like a vegetable for like a week.
Did the same.
Yeah, because it doesn't come from nowhere, does it? It's not like you're a machine. It's not like typing out. It's not like you're just typing stuff out. It's coming from you.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to have to do the gestational labor of thinking in between writing.
Yeah, that's the writing too, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You've got to have space for your mind to drift and for ideas to ferment and all that. I did read one essay that really helped me begin writing, which was by a psychoanalyst and poet called Noor Al-Sadir. She just published a book of nonfiction called Animal Joy. And she wrote this essay that was published on LitHub about going to clown school.
Wow.
Some kind of, I think Sacha Baron Cohen went to the same clown school, actually.
No way.
But what was useful about it was and that helped me be the sort of the bravery, to summon the courage, basically, was about you have to be your own type of freaky clown. Like
you do.
You know, like if you
I love that.
Sorry, if you try to be the clown that's imagining the audience and how it wants to be pleased, you'll write this strange fake book or fake, she's writing about poetry, like a fake poem that is like your fantasy of what it is to be competent, rather than something that's deeply truthful, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So like she talked about when everyone gets New Yorker fever and they want to get in the New Yorker, so they write something that they think will get them in the New Yorker, which is like a projection of what good writing is, rather than. And then obviously if you're the clown that's thinking too much about the audience, you can't really clown. You've got to be the freak.
It's about a lack of self-consciousness.
You've got to tap into the
expression.
Why do you want to write a book? You have to tap into the grain of truth, whatever it is that you're trying to write, in a way not think about the reader. Obviously, you're writing in language is inherently social, but and as I said, the book isn't not in a particularly normal chronology, and it's quite strange in various ways, as we've discussed, with diagrams and whatever. And now I think hopefully writing another book I'd feel more confident. I had to learn to trust myself, and that was really hard. And actually reading that essay was a really useful thing. It's like I'm writing the book for me, and I have to be myself and do it in the way that I want to, because that's all I can do. I can't write someone else's book. Or some weird projection of what I think people want to read that isn't really what I want to write. Because what is that?
I love that. You've got to be your own freaky clown.
It's so true though. Cause...
what's distinctively funny or whatever about whichever reader or person it is. The things that your parents are like, why would you write this? Why would you write that? It's like, well, because
this is my book from my perspective.
Exactly.
This is how I perceive it.
Yeah,
and that's okay. You got to be freaky, right? And I think it's fine.
What I found amazing about one of the many amazing things about your book is how you managed to write such complex situations and such complex emotions about people. There's often like chapters where there'll be the coexistence of trauma and upset with validating the labor and love that went into nurturing your existence, with the family unity dealing with issues of people being arseholes, racism, but or pointing out the difficulties of being an immigrant family in a rural village. On the other hand, there was real affection for many characters from where you grew up as well. And I think it's such a skill to allow that the complexity and all those different dynamics to cohabit in the same context, not to sort of cleanse out the complexity. You manage to tell a story that has so many threads going on like that. And I find that, you know, on the one hand, sometimes you're happy, but also you're really tired, but also you like the person from the village, but also some other person from the village is being an arsehole, and you love your mother, but also you really want your parents to just leave you the fuck alone. Like, you know, there's, you know, you manage to capture the real rich complexity of life, and I think that's so hard. And relationships, classic dickhead behaviour. It's more of a comment than a question, but how was it? What was it like writing about people that you really know?
Yeah, that's the thing that really fucked with my head. I guess I was like, because I come from such a small village, people got to read this, people know like who they are, and obviously I had to change a lot of the names for privacy,
right?
But I still feel they are very like you can if you know people who live in my village knows who's who, like they'll probably be able to point it out. A lot of like locations have changed as well, and that's what like freaks me out a little bit. It's like, oh god, these people are gonna read it, and it's like, I hope they like it. But in a way it was really fun. It was almost like fiction, but it wasn't fiction because these are people I knew. When I first started writing the book, I had an insane amount of post-its on my wall, so it looked like, you know, when you have when you're trying to like an investigation, you try to solve a crime and you got all these like ropes coming off everywhere and it's like pictures. That's what my wall looked like. I looked like I was trying to solve a murder mystery, like a murder case.
I love that you are of your own life.
Yeah, of my own life. So I had all these post-it notes I would like chop and change and move, and like the recipes and chapters and the characters. So I had one wall for characters actually, and one wall for the chapters and what we'll cover, and one wall for recipes. But yeah, the character section, I really wanted to just make sure that the core people were there, other than my family, but the people that was like reoccurring characters, like the front of house, like other counter staff and the delivery drivers and regular customers. I think it really helped having the customers because each and every customer that we had was such characters, and they were exactly like that. And I think that's the beauty of coming in a small village where there's not much going on, but it's the people that really make it. You know, we had this loyal customer who I love. They're called, like, my mum doesn't actually know their name, but we call her the bald rice granny because she would always come in early with her husband, and they'll come a half an hour early. They'll wait by the door for us to open, and they'll always have like a small boiled rice and a beef curry. And you know, I'd always let them in, sit on this like the bench before because it's really cold sometimes, and I'd just chat to them for a bit. Or you know, you get the drunken guy who'd always order a steak, and he was really racist and horrible. You know, it's just all these characters that have just stuck in my mind, and they just, in a way, they're so easy to write about because they almost write themselves because of the way they are. But yeah,
it's funny people ask you about whether stuff is fictionalized because it's like sometimes the truth
is this true? Yeah, but no, they're all completely real people that I know. It sounds like
you had some good, in a way, writing devices in place to help you write it, as if to give you that freedom.
Yeah, absolutely.
To write it in a way that felt truthful without people losing their right to privacy, as you say.
Exactly, because like privacy was such a big thing, and I was really, really worried about it because, you know, I make sure everyone were okay with it as well, and obviously tried to change as much names as possible to make sure. I think that's the thing I worried about, was just people being able to like track where we lived, or like, I mean with the business, it's like, you know, we used to be on like Google, so you'd be able to like find us and stuff, but now that it's another Chinese family, so yeah, I think privacy was such a big thing, and I worried about that.
Maybe you should do some fiction next. It sounds like you've got the skills for plotting.
Absolutely, I don't think I do. I feel like I don't even know.
I don't know if this is on the cards, but I would really love to watch a TV serialization or film of your book. Can you imagine?
Thanks so much to Rebecca May Johnson and Angela Hoy for allowing me to record this. Their respective books, Small Fires and Takeaway, are both out now, and I can't recommend them both highly enough. You can support Lecker on Patreon for £3 a month, and you get access to a bonus episode every month. This month's includes some extra bits from this conversation and the others that I'm releasing this month, specifically around recipes and their role within personal writing, which is something that I'm really interested in and kind of excited about exploring in that. It's going to be a great listen, if I do say so myself. So make sure you sign up if you'd like to hear it. Lecker is entirely listener funded, so Patreon subscriptions are really important in me being able to continue to make the podcast. Rebecca was actually a guest on a very early episode of Lecker, way back in 2016, and in the episode she talked about the tomato sauce recipe, which she writes about cooking over and over again in small fires. I went back and listened to it again myself recently, and it was really cool to hear kind of the early gem of that idea taking shape all of those years ago. I'll link to it in the show notes if you'd also like to hear it or to listen again. Music is by Blue Dot Sessions, as ever. Thanks to Ben McDonald, who is Lecker's resident illustrator. You can see his work on the Lecker Instagram and Twitter @Lecker Podcast. There's 2 more episodes to come this month around this same theme of how writers approach telling personal stories through food. Make sure you subscribe to listen as soon as they're released. And I'll be back in your feeds very soon. Thanks for listening.